Welcome to Backwoods Teacher, video number 1 on the Great War, also known as World War I. World War I was the first modern industrial war. It's the first global conflict in which many smaller countries got dragged into choosing sides between the larger combatants. It was the first test of American troops on a large scale, and it was a result of competition between European nations. It's also the result of regional powers dominating weaker nations economically and politically. Following the war is going to be one of the United States' first attempt at global diplomacy, which means in simple terms the U.S. first attempted to resolve a large-scale dispute. During this war, once the U.S. enters, the U.S. will be allies with France, Great Britain, and Russia. All right, this war was known as the Great War until the Second World War rolled around. It lasts from 1914 to 1918. The U.S. actually does not get involved until the tail end of the war, much like the Second World War. So we show up in the third quarter, so to speak. I like to bring a sort of a human perspective to some of these topics because we often forget that. This gentleman is Frank Buckles. He was the last United States World War I veteran who died apparently in 2011. He entered the war like a lot of Americans, desiring to serve. He was too little to serve in the Marine Corps, was unable to get into the Navy, and the Army eventually took him. And he served throughout his whole time in the war. His quote over here summarizes one of the things we'll be looking at, and that is how the Americans, when they showed up in the war, brought a lot of energy, inexperience, and a little bit of naiveness to the war, but that's one of the things, that sort of cocky arrogance is one of the things that helped to push the French and the British to a final victory. This is Mr. Buckles before he passed away with former President George W. Bush. He was an ambulance driver, not President Bush, but Mr. Buckles. He received the French Legion of Honor Award and several other awards like the occupation of Germany. What's cool about this guy is after the war, he was serving as a civilian in World War II, and he was captured by the Japanese. So before World War II, he was already fluent in several languages like French and Spanish and I think Italian and German. And by the time he gets done with World War II, he knew a little bit of Japanese. He was charged with, or given the task of creating the World War I monument in Washington, D.C. He worked on his farm until he died at the age of 105. Apparently, rumor has it at the age of 102, he rescued some kid named Isaac Hill at a county fair, and there were some fainting goats, show goats, I guess, that got out of hand, and they weren't fainting, and they had this poor kid cornered. Moving ahead, this is another gentleman who's typical of this generation. He was an American who enlisted in the Canadian Navy. He was too young to serve in the American Navy, and America was not involved. But this is another kind of cool aspect of this war. There were a lot of volunteers that served like this. Okay, getting on to the details that you need to know. There are some indirect causes that lead to this war, and these things are elements, they're factors, they're ideas that still occur in our world today, and they're still going on in our world today. So these are good things to understand. Ideas like militarism, secret alliances, nationalism, and imperialism. So those are 4 big concepts that I'm going to be talking about here today. Okay, imperialism. We've already talked about American imperialism with the last unit and America's war with Spain and how we acquired territory. Well, England at this time has the world's largest navy and therefore the world's largest empire, and they control parts of Africa, the Middle East, India, Afghanistan, and China. This creates a lot of competition from allies and enemies, And so some former friends become, to use like, Facebook speak, they become frenemies. And this is going to cause a lot of competition. I'm going to sort of repeat these ideas to make sure you get them. So Germany is a new nation, and Germany wants to compete with England, and they basically create a fleet of submarines to counter England's naval power. Germany then is going to seek to unite German-speaking people, trying to make an empire of German-speaking people. In Austria-Hungary, this is one of the areas with German-speaking people. These two areas want to join, and they have the largest land empire in Europe. They control an area known as the Balkan Peninsula. And in the Balkan Peninsula is a region known as Bosnia-Herzegovina. You're probably wondering, why on earth do I have to know a name that has multiple syllables? Well, this place is the site of several wars throughout history. And because this little area, has been overrun by multiple empires, there's constantly war there. So this is sort of a theme that goes throughout both world history and U.S. history. Okay, big idea I want you to be paying attention to here is that imperialism causes a lot of problems. It causes competition amongst the imperial powers. It causes nationalism, which works in two ways. It causes people to have a sense of excessive national pride or ethnic pride, but nationalism can also be a sense of sorting out or wanting your own identity because you're being oppressed by another group of people. So you see sort of a mild version of this in America when people say, I'm Irish American, or I'm Italian American, or I'm African American, or whatever. All right, this is a kind of a political cartoon of the British Empire that's based a lot on like Rudyard Kipling, who we talked about with the last topic of A White Man's Burden. This is Africa before 1914, and Africa had been divided up heavily by the European nations. A lot of the problems that exist in Africa today, where there's fighting between one group or another, was the result of this time period, because you might have two different tribes who had their own territories, and then they were lumped together in one region controlled by a European country. This is just a map of the British Empire areas controlled by Britain, and there's an old saying that the sun never set on the British Empire, and it was basically true because it wrapped all the way around the world. Okay, one of the other topics, or one of the other causes, is something called militarism. At the top, you have a British battleship, and the British and English, same thing. The English had this humongous navy, and that helped them to maintain their trade empire and their political empire. This ship is the Her Majesty's service Invincible. England had a lot of little islands that they controlled just to have like coal and things like that on them. So England basically dominates the seas in 1914. Germany wants to challenge this, though. They're tired of England controlling everything and England controlling trade, and they want to compete. So Germany's a relatively new nation. The German people obviously have been around forever, but as a nation, Germany was relatively new. And they have an exceptional, very intelligent leader named Otto von Bismarck. They also have a huge population. So Germany wants to compete and trade. They come up with something to counterbalance Britain's navy, and that is the U-boat or submarine. So the U-boats were able to counter the British Navy. They were very terrifying to fight against because of they were invisible basically, and their use of torpedoes, and they could basically like sneak attack. And the effects were devastating on people that sailed, and passenger ships, cargo ships, and the military ships alike. The German U-boats wreaked a very huge toll on shipping and travel. Okay, this just is like a diagram of populations in Europe. If you look at this, the yellow bars are the one side, the Allies, Allied powers in the pink bars have two um, of the central powers. So it shows, the countries with the largest populations were the ones that got into the war. And there was, kind of a simple idea behind that. They needed more land, they were expanding, they had the people for a military, so war becomes basically inevitable. All right, one more idea with militarism. Militarism is simply the practice of having a large military just to have one. And if you have a large military, you're going to use it. Britain had this large military, they had a large navy. France had a large standing army. The Russians had a large army, but they were pretty much behind the times. So, Germany is going to develop their army rapidly. Austria-Hungary also is going to develop their army. So everybody's got these big, massive armies, and you can't just have them stand around. They have to do something. This is just a chart showing the spending and how spending increased on military development in these different countries. Okay, this is one of those things that I'm not going to read the entire thing. I want you to look at it. The Balkan Peninsula was the site of a lot of nationalism, and it's because the Balkan Peninsula is kind of like this little piece of property that has been taken over by first the Ottoman Turks and then later the Austro-Hungarians, and it's going to be the site of a lot of conflict. If you take the time to read through this, this will explain a little bit of it. Okay, here's Austria-Hungary, there's Germany, there's Russia. This region down below here, where you see Serbia, this is the Balkan Peninsula. There's Serbia and Bulgaria and all of that. Austria-Hungary controlled this little region right here, and there were many Serbs in this area. So the Serbian population is divided because Austria-Hungary has taken part of their land. The Serbs are allied with the Russians. They are of the same ethnic background. They're Slavic people, just like Austrians and Germans are Germanic people. So this is like the hot spot that's going to cause the war. And this is just a photo of Serbs from World War I. Okay, two other concepts are pan-Germanism and pan-Slavism. The word pan means everything or all. So if you pan with a camera, you sweep the camera around like and take in the whole landscape. These two concepts, they're almost like opposing ideas, but they both exist in the Balkan Peninsula. All right, another factor that causes the war is a series of alliances, and some of these alliances went way back in history. But if you've ever had a friend that expects you to get into every argument or listen to every argument they have, or if they're in a bad mood that day and you have to be in a bad mood because they're in a bad mood, this is kind of the way the secret alliances work. You have to back up these people, and sometimes these people drag you into things. So, there were several alliances that were in existence. The big one, the one that's really going to trigger the war, is the alliance between Serbia and Russia. Serbia is small, Russia is huge. It has a lot of people. And so Serbia is like really struggling because they're wanting to break away and they're tired of Austria-Hungary kind of pushing them around. And Russia is kind of like Serbia's big brother who's not really around very often, but when they do come around, they're scary. So once the war gets started, it becomes a lot like a Three Stooges skit. Franz Ferdinand, the future ruler of Austria-Hungary, gets killed by a Serbian. Austria declares war on Serbia. Serbia then calls on its big brother Russia, who's going to declare war on Austria, and then Germany's going to declare war on Russia, and this is where it becomes like a Three Stooges skit. Okay, that may have been a little too much humor for you to handle, but we will move ahead. Okay, so it goes kind of like this. England, you would think, is allied with France, but that's actually not the situation. England is allied with Belgium. And when the war breaks out, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia is going to declare war on Austria-Hungary. Germany then declares war on Russia. France declares war on Austria-Hungary just because, France is always looking to get into a war. And then they declare war on Germany at the same time. You would think, again, England is going to come to their aid, but it's when Germany invades Belgium to get to France that England declares war. So it's a very complicated, crazy situation. Okay, moving on to Franz Ferdinand. This is actually a pretty interesting story. Franz Ferdinand goes from Austria down to the Balkan Peninsula to visit. He's not very well liked there. This is kind of like when JFK goes to Dallas. Very similar situation. They're unpopular there, so they go there thinking their presence will make it better. To make things a little more interesting, I added some drama to this, which is true, and I've always found this story to be kind of touching. Franz Ferdinand takes his wife Sophie with him on that fateful day. This is tragic in several ways. Sophie was from a low-ranking noble family. So Franz Ferdinand's family was ashamed of her, and he didn't often get to take her out at home like he would. She was not allowed to be with him at different parades and stuff, which is pretty hurtful. It's kind of a Cinderella sort of deal. So because he's going to Sarajevo and he actually loved her and liked being with her, he takes her with. And once they're there, they're going on this parade route. They're in a limo, convertible limo, and Franz Ferdinand changes his mind and deviates from the parade route, and they make a three-point turn. He backs up, and when he does that, in the crowd, there's like this terrorist group called the Black Hand, and they're a pro-Serbian group that wants to liberate Bosnia from the Austrians. They jump out of the crowd, and they shoot both Franz Ferdinand and his wife. To make things even sadder, Franz and Sophie both get shot at close range. Franz's last words are allegedly, "Sophie, not you too? What about the children?" It's okay. Get a Kleenex. It upsets me too. And this starts the war. Okay, here's some other info for you. The thing that's going to get the U.S. into the war is the sinking of the Lusitania. It doesn't immediately get us into war, but it's a big factor. So the Lusitania was a ship. This tells the story right along here. All right, and finally, there's another thing that gets the U.S. into the war, and that is something called the Zimmerman Note, also known as the Zimmerman Telegram. This is an actual copy of it. The Zimmerman Telegram was in code, and this is a political cartoon showing what it did. It basically was a telegram in which a German official encouraged Mexico to turn against the U.S. And the U.S. and Mexico were not on the best of terms at this time because the Mexican-American War was not that old, and we had taken Texas away. General Pershing had recently invaded Mexico looking for Pancho Villa and stormtrooped all over the Mexican countryside. Another interesting fact is that the British were the ones who intercepted this telegram and broke the code. So the Zimmerman telegram is kind of a text message where your friend shows you where someone else is talking about you to kind of get you to think a certain way about somebody. This note is also very similar to the Delhomme letter from the Spanish-American War. Those two ideas are very similar. And then to further illustrate it and wrap things up, I've created a modern day example. I intercepted some text messages. I have no idea what any of this means, but I guess this is from the softball team or something. I don't know. I'll have to ask Coach Barry, make sure he knows about this. And yeah. Okay, so America before the war. Well, America was both eager to get into the war and not eager to get into the war. And there are some reasons that America did not want to get into war. And those are the things I want you to look at and hear. I'm going to quit reading through all this. Take some time to read it. It's pretty self-explanatory. And America going into the war, as I showed you with that first quote from Frank Buckles, America was very confident, overconfident, if anything, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. Okay, closing on a positive and happy note. This is Snoopy, and Snoopy was a cartoon character created by Charles Schulz. Snoopy is famous for flying his doghouse, which is a Sopwith camel, a plane in his mind. It's one of my favorite characters, and as I've gotten older and been teaching, it's come to my attention that students no longer believe in holidays, Santa, or the fact that Snoopy was indeed a World War I flying ace. And this is tragic because I feel like you're losing out. So using Google, I was able to find some proof that Snoopy could actually fly. Have a good day, children. See you soon, and try to smile once in a while. Believe in yourselves and Snoopy.